Yeah, we are in the place of
All right. Well, I lost my individual. All right. Welcome this morning. I thought we had everything figured out, but welcome this morning. I want to welcome you to the Kirk Anderson Show on drydenwire.com and Drydenwire's Facebook page. Today I have a very special guest that we'll be able to talk to in just a moment, named Marc Hill. He is a longtime firefighter, paramedic, and also an educator in many realms. And I'm just really excited to get to talk to him about his book that he's got out that is for leadership, teaching leadership, how to, and also specific to firefighter leadership, how to train firefighters in many capacities. But he's also got a great amount of experience in leadership himself, and why I asked him to come on is to talk more specifically about some of the trauma that firefighters and law enforcement officers have experienced in the line of duty, and how we can better help those individuals, including myself as a firefighter and a first responder, to deal with the trauma that sometimes we see in our space. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to remind everyone that today's show is sponsored by Rhett Bozen. He's your authorized AT&T business manager, and if you're looking to upgrade your phone or internet, you need to give Rhett a call today and mention the keywords Drydenwire to take advantage of show specials. We've got a little video clip for you, and we'll watch that and come back and start the interview.
Are you ready for a new cell phone or cellular service provider? Rhett Bozen's an AT&T authorized retailer and is ready to get you connected. Skip the store and get personalized support at your business or home. Call Rhett today at 715-771-3535.
All right. My special guest today is Marc Hill, the author of Too Dark 30, a book on leadership. And I've had just a little bit of time to connect with him ahead of the show, but I wanted to just give him an opportunity to say hello and maybe do a little introduction of who he is and some of his experience that he's had over the last 21 years in the fire service and emergency medical services. So welcome to the show, Marc.
Hi, Kirk. Thanks very much for having me on. Appreciate it.
So tell me a little bit about your experience. I know that you started in the fire service, you said 21 years ago. What is your leadership and like coming through those ranks? Where did you start and where did you end up as you closed out your career?
Well, if we want to go way back, my dad was a volunteer firefighter for many, many years. I grew up going to the fire hall, is what we called it, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I'm a Yooper by birth.
Okay.
So, growing up in the fire hall, I went down with my dad and we rolled hose, and, he would practice knots, with me, and he was also my Cub Scout leader. So, he would always tell us, you got to tie knots with gloves on, Mark, because when you're in a fire, you're not going to take your gloves off to tie a knot. So you better know how which he's not wrong, and that was right. At an early age when I was, 8, 9, 10 years old, here I am tying a bowline under our kitchen table with gloves on, so I grew up in the fire service. And then I went off to college, got a degree in social science, became a social studies teacher. At the same time, I immediately started being a volunteer firefighter with my local department. Did that for many years, and got eventually into being a full-time fire chief. Was a full-time firefighter here in the city of Wausau for many years. You know, the thing that separates, you know, because people always ask, well, what's the difference between a volunteer and, you know, a quote-unquote career, you know, firefighter? The job itself is the same, right? We're all putting fires out. We're all putting, you know, the wet stuff on the red stuff, you know. But at the same time, you know, the amount of calls, I would say, is the biggest difference.
Yeah.
If you're in a larger, you know, if you're in a larger urban area, like the city of Wausau here is, you know, itself is 40,000 people, but we serviced, you know, EMS-wise for sure, we serviced well over 60-some thousand people and plus, you know.
Wow.
So, you know, between our 3 stations, you know, on the department, you know, we'd average, you know, anywhere between 5 to 12 ambulance calls every single day that we worked.
Wow.
So, which is a big difference between when I was on my volunteer department. You know, we were very rural. It was outside of Antigo, Wisconsin. So, you know, we were lucky to have 5 calls in a month. So, you know, the difference between those two, it's a pretty big difference. Even though the calls are the same, the difference was I had a lot of repetition and practice when I was on the career department versus when I was on the rural volunteer department. You know, so it goes back to the biggest reason why I wrote my book was because, you know, being able to train and being able to teach people how to do things is huge. You know, it's paramount. You know, the way everything happens nowadays, we're getting so many new people into the fire department and into the fire and EMS services that have absolutely no experience.
Right.
You know, and you know, how do you relay the information? How do you try to impart on them all the knowledge that you may have or others may have in the department, that institutional knowledge? How do you relay that and get the new people to absorb it all that haven't had the experience yet?
Yeah.
And that's the key to teaching. You know, that's the key to, you know, anybody who is a instructor or educator. You know, how do I get you to understand? You know, that's the big question.
Yeah, I think the big thing for a volunteer fire service, and I don't know if it's different for a full-time fire service, is getting people interested in even starting. We have a number of departments that are hurting for EMTs, paramedics, firefighters, first responders, and just getting people to say yes to that initial, I'm going to come take a tour and see if this is a good fit for me. And part of that, I think, is the amount of training that it used to be versus what it is now. And when your dad was in the fire service and teaching you knots, he probably didn't have nearly as many classes as fire departments put out now.
Yeah, the requirements were far different. Even getting on the department was different. You know, this is back in the early '80s when they had a meeting among the guys in the bar of the fire hall because they had a keg in a bar in the fire hall. You know, so it was a different time. It was the '80s, you know, and then when everyone voted, yep, we want Mike to be in charge, or, you know, we want Mike to be on the department, everyone raised their hand. Yep, okay, great. Congratulations, you're now a part of it, you know. Yeah, it's a whole different world today.
Yeah.
You know, we can say and we can argue, too, like, is it better or worse? I mean, there's so many things that, you know, those of us that are of a certain age, and we all have this nostalgia for the way I wish things were the way they were back in the day, and it's so much more complicated now. It is, and I think the way lawyers and lawsuits and insurance industries and things like that, they have all spurred the training requirement and the, you know, all those things, which, again, it's a dichotomy, right? It's good to have high standards. It's good to have, you know, you want to be legally responsible to do all these different things, especially when you're on the EMS field, and literally I can kill you if I give you the wrong temperature saline fluid. Like, literally, I can send you into a rhythm and I can kill you. I can kill you with water. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be medication, which is even far more dangerous. So, you know, departments and municipalities, they have, you know, they're left to, what are we going to do? How are we going to accomplish these things? Then at the same time, like you just said, you know, the training requirements and the hours that are required to do the training is ridiculous now. And Wisconsin still is one of the least requirement heavy states of all of our United States.
Really?
We were, for a long time, Wisconsin was number 50 for having the lowest requirements for fire and EMS, specifically for fire. Wisconsin still has an entry-level minimal hour course.
Right.
You don't even have to take firefighter one. You don't even need to be a certified firefighter one.
Right.
You just need to sit through a 16, 18, 20, and then congratulations, you can pull a hose and you can go into a burning building.
Yeah.
And hopefully not kill yourself or kill the guy next to you or the lady next to you, or God forbid there's a victim in there that you have to,
You have to drag out.
So it's a hard one.
Yeah.
It is. When I was fire chief in Rothschild, we had people on the department that had been on the department literally for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
They were 72-year-old men who, they told me straight up, listen, Mark, I do not want to go into the burning building, but I'll run the pump for you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. I need someone to run the pump anyway. So if I can take you, have you drive and run the pump, I don't have to worry about that because I know you're going to know what's going on because you've been doing it for 50 years. And I can take some of these new people inside with me so that now they get experience of pulling hose, doing searches, laddering thing, ventilation, all these different things that they're going to need to develop these skills for. That's fine. I was fine with that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you said, how do you get the new people in?
Right.
Like I said, I grew up on a volunteer service.
Sure.
So that's not happening like it used to be,
Do you have any idea how many hours you've put into training? I looked at your LinkedIn and you list your certifications. I mean, some of this, so my audience knows that, or most of them know that I'm a firefighter in St. Croix Falls. It's a volunteer service and a first responder. For me to go through I did not do the certification. That was a third class, but I did do Firefighter 1 and 2. And that translated to 60-ish hours. Mm-hmm. And you did have to pass like a skills test and kind of, get certified in some sense. But then you could go to a third class and then the state does some certification. A lot of our younger guys did that. I started in the fire service when I was 39.9. And I told my wife, I want to do this. Now it's now or never. My body's not going to do this forever. And so for the last 8 years, I've done that. EMS-wise, I did get licensed through the state and national certification for first responders. And that was another 66 hours, I think. And then you had to go through the testing at the state level and get the national certification. So that has to be renewed quite often.
Every 2 years,
But then there's hazmat. There's how to drive vehicles, how, in closed spaces, confined spaces. What are some of the certifications that you hold as a full-time firefighter, and just ballpark some hours in those classes?
Well, and that's the thing. I did the certification for Fire 1, Fire 2. I took Fire Officer 1. I took Fire Instructor 1 and 2. I took Fire Inspector 1. Certified in all of those. I took Driver Operator Pumper, certified. Driver Operator Aerial, certified. Hazmat Technician, like you said, certified. Confined Space Entry and Confined Space Rescue, certified. Rope Rescue Technician. Vehicle Extrication Technician. And that was all fire stuff. Then Paramedic, which was I took EMT, passed EMT, took advanced EMT, passed advanced EMT, took paramedic, passed paramedic, even though I'm still waiting for National Registry to come back and say that we screwed up your test. So you're talking, though, that's just fire and EMS core courses. You're talking, gosh, I don't know.
Many of these have to be redone.
Over 1,000+ hours.
Yeah.
You're looking at well over 1,000+ hours.
Yeah, and some of these have to be redone every year or every 2 or 2 years.
For paramedic, I have to have my ACLS, my advanced cardiac life support, renewed every 2 years. my PALS, my pediatric advanced life support, has to be renewed. Obviously my basic first aid CPR has to be renewed, which is it renews with the other things. You know, there's just there's my PHTLS, my pre-hospital trauma life support. You know, I'm also an EMS instructor, level 1 and level 2. So
it's probably fair to say
all those things. Yes.
Yeah, when you see someone, particularly on the volunteer, and volunteers don't have to train that much, but we do have, you know, I do training 3 days a week or 3 days a month on Tuesdays. Our 4th Tuesday is designated for officers, and so we get that day off. But our department does do a lot of training. I think that one of the things that it's difficult to say is, hey, we want you to come in and be a volunteer firefighter, but you got to, not only do you have to make a good amount of the calls, but we need you to train and go through Firefighter 1 and 2, which might be every Saturday for however many weeks, or every Monday night or something like that. It's a big commitment to ask people, and a lot of people can't convince their spouse or their significant other.
Thing, right? Yeah, if you look back, you know, let's go set the Wayback Machine to when my dad did it in the early 80s. He was working.
Right.
My mom wasn't.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
You didn't have both parents working. Like you have to today, you know, with inflation, the cost of everything, you know, yada yada yada. I mean, mom and dad are working, you know. So now you're left to we ran into this problem just in the Wausau Fire Department, where when I started out early, we had forced mandatory overtime.
Right.
So if you were the lowest person on the totem pole, you had to stay. So we worked a 24-hour shift, and then if they were you know, someone called in sick, or there were people injured, or someone was on vacation or whatever, and they were short staffed for the next day, hey, guess what? You're not going home.
Right.
You're here for the next 12 hours. Well,
yeah, that's tough.
Exactly, because it's like, well, okay, number one, I worked 24 hours. Now I'm going to work another 12. Yes, I was on the ambulance, so I slept about 4 hours last night. So, you know, now I'm going to have to stay for another 12 hours to be on the ambulance again and deal with all the calls again on an extremely limited, you know, sleep schedule. And my wife, who works full-time as well, and we have 3 daughters. So get them to school, make sure they get to school. And again, I'm working 12, so we work from 6:45 to 6:45. So not only is it getting the kids to school, but now it's making sure they come home from school. What activities are they doing? So when you tell people that, you know,
right,
it's a hard sell. It is. On top of the stress, on top of the things that you're going to see, on top of the things that you're going to deal with that you'll never forget.
Right.
You know,
and we'll get into a little of that.
It's another thing to have to, you know, learn how to deal with all the things that you're going to end up seeing and doing.
Right. We'll get into some of the stress here in a second, but can you just speak to the relationship with, like, the spouse? I know my wife, I had to, you know, convince her that you don't have to do every call. You don't have. Now, when I first started as a volunteer, and we were paid on call, so it wasn't, when I say volunteer, you do get paid, but it's not a salary. And it translates to roughly enough money to pay some taxes and maybe some Christmas presents. We actually get paid once a year. In November, we'll get a nice size check, depending upon how many calls you go on. And as a first responder, we get about 250 to 300 calls a year. Between fire, car accidents, and first responder. So convincing that spouse, when I have a full-time job, I'm self-employed, and I have some other hobbies, like I'm the mayor of St. Croix Falls, and and I've got a few irons in the fire. So what was it like for you to you know, convince your wife? Was there much convincing needed, or was she supportive of that? How did that all work out, to say the least?
Yeah. My wife is fantastic. We've been married let's see, we've been married now. We've been together for 24 years. We've been married, legally married, for, let's see, 18 years. So, you know, there wasn't a lot of convincing. And, you know, it wasn't one of those things with me, because we had been together in college, and I was also coaching football in college. So, you know, she knew I liked being involved in, you know, team activities and sports, and there was always you know, there was always something I was going to be doing after work, or, you know, things like that. So she knew that going in. So when I got my first teaching job, when I was teaching high school in Anago, again, I was coaching football, I was coaching track, I was coaching powerlift. So I was not home right away anyway.
Sure.
So for me to come home and say, hey, Sarah, I want to do the volunteer firefighter, because she knew my dad was a volunteer firefighter. You know, she knew all that stuff too. She's like, well, yeah, okay, obviously you're gonna, yeah. It wasn't like, hey, I want to do this. Is that okay? It was more of, hey, I'm going to do this, you know, just so you know.
Right. Yeah.
And she was fine with it, and she's been very supportive with it. The biggest challenge, you know, that she had to deal with, and I had to deal with too, because, you know, when you have that pager and it goes off, you want to go and help.
Right.
You know, you don't get into the job for, you know, getting a T-shirt and, you know, having the pager and riding around on parades. You want to do stuff. You know, most people that get into this position, you know, they're type A personalities, they're doers, they're fixers. You know, let me fix that. I can fix that for you, you know, or if I can't, I'm going to break it trying, you know, that kind of a thing. And, you know, that mentality is fantastic, and we need more people like that, you know. So she knew that's how I was. So there wasn't a lot of convincing her of that. The issue was the time, you know, like there were times when the call would go off, or we were on the way out the door to do something, or you know, we'd be on our way back from someplace, and you know, the pager would go off, or, you know, things like that. It's like, oh, hey, they're right down the road. I've got my gear in my bag in the trunk. You know what I mean? Like, because for our department, we were so rural that I kept my gear in my car. Right. So it was, you know, I would go to the scene. There were there was a trailer fire, and there was another garage fire that occurred that were literally country block down from where I lived. I was there on scene with the homeowner trying to put the fire out for 10 minutes before our first arriving engine got there. Right. You know, and that's just, it is what it is, and you got to do what you got to do. You know, you try not to get yourself into trouble, but at the same time, hey, if it comes between me and someone's inside and I'm going to, you know, have to do something, then that's what I have committed to doing, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to try my best to do those things. So, you know, that's something that a lot of career professional people don't get either about the volunteer aspect, that help is on the way, but it's not 30 seconds out. Yeah. Your help is 10, 15, 20, or if you're calling WPS for, you know, getting the power gas shut off, it is, we'll be there in an hour and a half. You know, what's your ETA? So, sit out and wait. Yeah, exactly. So you better know how to shut off the gas and the power yourself, kind of a thing, you know. So it is what it is, and it's one of those situations that people all have to deal with. But, you know, for spouse-wise, there wasn't a lot of convincing. Her struggles was when I became a career firefighter. That was when she had to deal with, I was gone for full 24 hours. So when I was volunteering, it was one thing, you know, I'd have calls here and there. Now I was gone all the time. Yeah, you're on shift. So I literally was gone for 24 hours, you know, and she didn't like being home by herself, especially with all three kids, you know, so we have a Doberman, you know, so she felt better with the Doberman being around, you know, in case something happened, or, you know, things like that. So, you know, that was her hardest thing. And then when I did come home, I was exhausted. Yeah. I was not, you know, and then over the course of years, you know, hindsight being what it is, yeah, I was short-tempered, you know, I was just, and it's not just physical exhaustion, it's the mental exhaustion, you know? Right. and I just didn't want to deal with things. Don't ask me questions right now. I don't want to have to try to figure anything out right now. I'm barely able to walk. So, you know, and so she had to realize and had to deal with, you know, the Jackal versus Hyde kind of a thing where, you know, this isn't the guy I married. This isn't the guy that, you know, that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. This is a completely different person, you know.
Right.
And you change. And you know, it's part of the process, and it's part of, you know, some of the realization that we have to do those things, that you have to come to grips with. When you see what you see and when you do what you do, you are not going to be the same person. Yeah.
So one of the things that I noted in your book, and your book is on leadership, but in chapter, I think it was 9, it talks specifically about how to ask the tough questions, and deal with the death, the stress, and all the dark things that happen. I think that really was something that I know as a first responder, going out on my first call where I dealt with somebody who had passed away. There wasn't like a good manual on how to deal with it, and you know, I love my department. I love the men and women that I serve with, but we're all kind of in this like, what do we do scenario, and nobody said, here's the ABC of what you do to like shake that, you know, gross feeling of, man, I just had to put someone in a body bag, or I just had to cut someone out of a car and they didn't make it. And in a day with social media, I think it's really hard because in a small community, I may know that person. I may know their mom or their sister. I may go to church with them or whatever. And if I don't know them, I can just put their name into Facebook and I can learn all about them and grieve for them, which I've been told, like, man, maybe you don't want to do that. but maybe not the best thing. Yeah. So, but you know, it is one of those things that you really should come to grips with how to deal with that, because tough things do happen. And so I wanted to just talk to you about some of the tough things that have happened in our area, and maybe just have a dialogue about how you would recommend not only firefighters and paramedics, but also law enforcement. We are on scene and work closely with our brothers and sisters in law enforcement. I'm very good friends with several of the sheriff's deputies and the sheriff in my county. I know Ben is really close with Barron County Sheriff Fitzgerald. They have a show together, and many times during that show, those are the things they talk about, are the tough, you know, scenarios that they have to deal with. Whether in Barron County we had a high-profile kidnapping that luckily ended well, but that was a topic of how difficult it was for the law enforcement. And we've had 2 officers this past year that were shot in the line of duty in Barron County and one in St. Croix County, all in the span of like less than 2 months. And those officers and those paramedics and those firefighters went on scene with people that they maybe see at the grocery store, that they hang out with outside of that, and then they're maybe offered counseling, whether they take it or not. But they have to deal with that privately, and some of them do, and probably some of them don't. So you have a chapter in your book dedicated to that. How would you recommend, you know, that first step? And I should mention, if you are watching, and we do have some people watching online, if you're a firefighter or a law enforcement officer or a spouse of one, and you have questions or comments, please put them in the comments on Facebook, and we'll share those as part of the show, and we can try and answer them. But you've been in this 21 years. You've seen some stuff. I'm a volunteer. I've seen probably a fraction of what you've had to deal with. How do you deal with it? How would you recommend, from a training perspective, encouraging younger people in the department or veterans who are starting to get a little bit of that Jekyll and Hyde, to just take it easy and like deal with some of your stuff?
I think a lot of it starts with, the bigger reason why I wrote my book, Too Dark 30, how to teach and how to train people. I never had one class. Still.
Yeah.
I'm developing one myself for, online, but I've never had a class. There was never a point in any of the training in the thousands of hours that I've had and all the, certifications that no one ever taught me how to tell someone that their loved one died. Your mom is, never. That was never even a whimp of a discussion. Not once. Right. And a lot of it stems from the fact of, because it's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And we, those hard conversations, people avoid them like the plague, right? You don't want to have to do those things. Right. I remember the first call I got on my volunteer department was for a near head-on collision of a guy that was coming back from Rhinelander, crossed the center line, hit a logging truck. Didn't end well for him. And when we arrived on scene, everyone scattered because they knew what was going to happen. Here's Mark, the new guy. Yeah, I'll do it. No problem. I'm here to help you, Chief. Go get her, And he gave me the jaws, and he's like, all right, go help the coroner. I'm like, okay. So I walked over there. Yeah, that was my first job of the first call. The first thing I had to do was, I was cutting body parts of this poor guy who was coming home from his third shift, didn't make it home. And, I spent the next over an hour trying to get as much of him out of that vehicle that I could pry out as possible, and put it into the black zipper bag and zip it up. The coroner even left me. So there I was by myself, with one floodlight behind me trying to see, in the twilight dark at Too Dark 30. Hence the name of my book being Too Dark 30, because everything bad happens, at bar close at, Too Dark 30. So
wow.
But again, no one asked me how are you doing, Mark? No one came over to help me. When I was done and I walked back over, the only thing someone said to me was the guy who drove. He's like, "Hey, make sure you hose that jaws off."
Oh wow, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I suppose. Good point. Yep.
Now I will say,
make sure those batteries are charged.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But no one said anything, and that goes for everything. And like you said, people. I've been on two vehicle accidents that involved students who I had, and both of the students who I had, I knew them. I had them as literally, like I said, I had them as students as their teacher. I knew them both. They didn't survive.
Wow.
And then one of the scenes, the family who I knew because I also coached them came, and then it's like now you're dealing with a completely distraught mom of her child, who, and it's like, how do you, process that, deal with all that, and you're never going to forget any of those things, finding, in a hoarder house, finding dead body, finding the lady who was the hoarder, finding her all burned up. Great. All the, horrible, SIDS deaths, baby to 6-month-old, baby who died, and you're trying to do, resuscitation on, it is horrible. It's absolutely, especially when you have children, it gets worse because you're thinking of your own kids, and now it's like, oh my God, this kid is this age, or this kid is, I have a daughter that's almost that age, or, you may have cousins or nephews, or, you start, when you get into the older realm, in our ages, you start to empathize more than you were when you were young, because when you're young, you think you're unstoppable and you can do anything.
Sure.
But as time goes on, you realize that, it all adds up, and, no one ever had that class to tell you how to deal with things. And I've gone through trainings, now. I went in, when we had our SIDS call, the baby obviously did not make it, and we had a critical incident stress debrief after that call. So the department tried to, do the best job they can. They brought in a counselor, they brought in, specialist, griefs, blah, blah, blah. Had a big meeting. We're sitting there, And the lady's like, well, does anyone want to talk about it? And there was, med crew, 2 people, engine crew was 2 people. There were 4 people sitting there. Our battalion chief arrived because it was a critical call. He was there with us. It was the 5 of us sitting at a table, and we all looked at each other, and we looked at her, and we sat there for 5 minutes not saying anything.
Right.
And it's just like, it's cliche, and it's, I'm macho, and I don't want to talk about it, and, all these different things. And part of that's true, because we don't want to admit that we're having a problem with what we saw or what we felt or what we dealt with or what we did on the scene or whatever. Because if we have to talk about it, then we have to admit that it happened. And if we just keep denial, then we can try to kick that can down the river, So
do you think things have changed?
People do.
Do you think things have changed? All that does
is it just bottles things up, right? It creates problems down the road that you're going to eventually deal with this.
Right.
Even if it's one call and you're not thinking about it, eventually you're going to deal with it. Yes, you will. You may not deal with it today. You may not deal with it tomorrow, but 5 years from now, something may strike you that reminds you of the day that occurred and what you were doing.
Yeah.
And it'll all come back like it was yesterday.
Do you think things have changed since, you got into the service? I know for me, we've had a couple incidents where it wasn't quite that way. I mean, there's definitely times where people just don't say anything. But we had an incident with 2 students that were killed from the high school, and we had the after incident debriefing that went really well. They didn't allow us to not talk. We each went around the room, and there was quite a few of us, and we gave our version of what we saw and what we thought went well. And at the end of that, I actually felt pretty good, and that was with the local chaplain and one of the fire chiefs who's on his team. And yet, when we left that, it wasn't something that I left that in the room. Like, it took me a long time past the funeral, and of course it was right at COVID, so we're lucky we even were able to meet for a funeral, because the shutdowns happened like just after that. But we had a SIDS death this year where we were in the ER after the fact, and the paramedics and the firefighters, they broke down crying and were very much open with their feelings. And I was very surprised by that, and I'm a crier by nature anyway. You can ask my wife that. But I was surprised at how open they were with their feelings, because it has been kind of a taboo subject. Yeah. My first law enforcement funeral as a videographer was for a local police officer who was shot back in 1991, and I was videotaping the funeral for his family, and I scanned the crowd of people for part of the video, and I was just shocked at all the wives that were crying and all of the officers who were stoic. I mean, not an emotion on their face. And I don't know if it was anger or grief or how they were dealing with it, but as I look at that video, I was just mesmerized by all of the men and women in uniform that were not going to let a teardrop come. So I don't know if that's abnormal or normal, but it's certainly something to, as I process mine, my grief and my stress, I talk about it, and because I'm willing to talk about it, my wife is happy to listen, or my captain on my department is willing to listen, or we do have a chaplain. But I will talk about it until I don't dream about it, until it's not something that I'm unable to process. I have a comment here that I'm going to throw up if I can figure out how to do that, and we can read it. My daughter, when 18 spent time on med flights, she came home one time and said she was trying to breathe through her tears and said, "Mom, I can't do this job anymore. Too many friends and families. I can't sleep anymore. I want to do the job I'm good at. but it took the last friend during the flight that she made, her decision that she would go back to the ER. She's now a CO in a bank. So she got out of the service. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Renee. Hopefully I didn't butcher it too much, but yeah, there's a lot of people that get out of the service after certain calls. You said, like, my kid's that age, and I've always said,
thing, like, you go into it wanting to help and wanting to do all these different things. You know, you see stuff on TV, you see movies, you all that stuff that they glamorize and they dramatize and they actionalize. You know, they make it so exciting. And it is. You know, it's one of those jobs that you never know what you're going to deal with on a day-to-day basis, you know,
right.
And which makes it exciting and it makes it interesting. And, you know, having the camaraderie and, you know, cooking and screwing around and, you know, stuff that's all parts of the job, you know, that is true. However, yeah, dealing with all of the stuff that you see and how to deal with it is completely untouched. And it's better now than it was, right? Yeah. 20 plus years ago, or when my dad was in, you know, back in the, you know, 30, almost 40 years ago, and going even farther back, you know, you're talking about also generational issues, right? Mm-hmm. Baby boomers and how they were raised and how things went versus millennials versus Gen Xers. And, you know, every generation, we're all raised differently, and we all have different, you know, we all have different strengths and weaknesses. So, you know, our ability to cope with things is far different than someone who's 20 years old to cope with things, which is different than someone who's 60, 70 years old and how they cope with things.
Right.
So part of being a good leader and part of being a good, you know, person to charge, you know, you don't literally have to have a title of leader, but, you know, part of being the good person in charge is to know and understand that we're all different people, every one of us. You know, some of us are more analytical and they can have that dual personality, like, no, this is work, Mark. Work, Mark deals with it this way. When I go home Mark is a different person. And they teach that. I've come to find after, you know, all these different years and talking with different ER doctors, they literally tell you that. They tell the doctors that in med school. Like, you need to literally develop a double personality, that you have a professional side, that you deal with these things. I mean, you know, all the stuff that we see and all the stuff that we deal with, imagine being, you know, a cancer doctor, mm-hmm. where you know all these people. I mean, let's be honest, 75% of these people, they're going to die, you know, on a daily basis. How do you deal with that? Right? And, or an ER doctor where we're bringing them to people and they're trying to have to fix them or trying to put them back together or whatever. You know, I got them there alive, but then I find out that they died, you know, a couple hours later or a day or two later or whatever, right? So they're dealing with the aftermath as well. So it's not just you know, understand and realize that it's all the positions that connect with what's going on, and we all have to deal, like you said with the comment of flight. Why do you call a helicopter? That's
pretty
beyond
bad.
Even the worst, right?
Yeah.
That is the top of the worst of the worst, right? I'm calling it a chopper because I know I'm not going to get this person to the hospital quick enough because they're going to die, right? So you're only going to see the worst of the worst, you know? So yeah, finding, and you know, it's one thing to go into the position and to, you know, like when I was on my volunteer department, I had gotten experience, so I had some idea of what the job entailed. When I got into the career department and was now, you know, a professional firefighter, I had background, so I had prior knowledge as to, okay, this is how this is going to go. This is going to suck. You know, I know that going up.
Yeah.
When I was on that department, we got people that were now fresh out of school who didn't have the experience. You know, they're 19, 20, 21 years old. This is their first job they've ever had in their life.
Yeah.
They've never driven a fire truck before. They've never driven an ambulance before. They've never been on these calls. And that was part of the thing. And, you know, you ask, how do we deal with these things? And a lot of it goes back to training. One of the first things I did with these new fresh, proby people. I brought him into the back of the ambulance. I said, okay, tell me that my mother died. We just worked her. We worked a code on her. We tried everything we did. We went through the gambit. We cleared out every shelf in this ambulance. We worked her for 35, 45 minutes. Ain't gonna happen. She died. I want you to tell me that my mother just died.
Right.
And these kids, I say kids because they were, you know, half my age. They sit there staring at me like, yeah, well, because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to deal with the situation. It's another thing to now have to tell someone that their loved one died.
Yeah.
You know, how do you go through that? And that's when, in chapter 9 of my book, you know, I wanted to address that there are ways that you can go about doing so that are successful, you know. And I went through the step-by-step process of how you relay that kind of information to someone. But here's the thing, and I say this in my book, it's going to suck. It's hard, and it never gets any better. I've told hundreds of people that their moms, their dads, their sisters, their wives, their brothers, their husbands, they've died. Mm-hmm. I've called numerous people dead on scene. You know, in all the times and all the experience that I've had doing that, it doesn't get any easier.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't get any better. Every single time that it happens, it sucks. It sucks big time. You know, some of them are harder than others because of the ages, you know, and the circumstances.
Right.
You know, but a lot of it has to go back, like you said. You talk to your wife. You know. And I kind of want to address that also in the book. Give you positive coping strategies, right? If you're not married and has a spouse. And here's the thing: I've told my wife certain things. You know, when she says, you know, she can see that, you know, I'm upset about stuff. But at the same time, I also want to keep a barrier between. Sure. She doesn't need to have all the gory details of what the hell happened.
Yeah.
And she doesn't.
I do try and protect her from that. That's
I don't
for sure.
want to give her. I'm not looking to take this load off my back and shift it to her.
Right.
Right. You know, so there's a careful way to do that, right? Because I don't want her to worry about me and about what I'm doing. Right. You know.
But it is something to be. She can empathize with you and also see that. And if you've got a good relationship, you know, she can even kind of alert you to the fact that, hey, you know, maybe we need to spend more time talking about this or whatever. Yeah. But
well, she'd always tell me, why don't you? Because I like, you know, I like lifting and things like that. You know, she's like, why don't you just go do a set of bench? Go. Why don't you go or go take a walk? Because we live right by a Rib Mountain. She's like, why don't you take a walk?
Yeah.
And she's not wrong. You know, and those are things you got to find those positive coping strategies to try to help yourself.
And that's a chemical thing. I mean, getting out and doing weightlifting and walking that hits the endorphins and all kinds of stuff in your body that can kind of cleanse out the negative stuff and replace it with some good stuff. And many times we do the opposite in the service. I don't drink personally, but I know that is a huge thing for a lot of people that go through this stress, and I know a lot of law enforcement officers who do like to have a cocktail and things like that. I don't fault them for that. I don't. For me personally, it's not how I cope. But if that's the way that you're coping, I think that can add to the problem over time.
And it starts small, and it gets worse with those negative things, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, and I talk about this too in the book, that anything you do in excess is bad, right? Yep. Even the most positive things, taking walks, that's great. It's good to take a nice hour walk or, you know, a half-hour walk in the woods, clear your mind, get right with what's going on, set up yourself for success for the day, you know, blah, 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 blah. But if I'm now spending, you know, 3 hours every day on a walk, walking 9 miles every single day, and you know, because I'm trying to not think about different things, you know, anything in excess is bad.
Yeah,
right?
If you're not getting your work done, it's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. Throwing yourself into work, or you know, doing so anything that in excess is bad. It's those negative like drinking, you know, drugs, things like that. Those things, they're also negative coping strategies, and they get bad real quick. That's
Right.
that's the thing with those. It's a slippery slope when you start going down those trails.
Sure.
I agree with you. I'm not much of a drinker. I'd rather sit and eat a pound bag of gummy bears, but at the same time, I shouldn't be sitting there eating a pound bag of gummy bears every
Right.
single day, right? So,
Right.
Finding things to cope and to deal, writing my book was a good coping strategy for me.
Yeah, I bet. For me, that's
there's
true.
a lot of guys on the department they're big fishermen and hunters and things. They like to go and they get lost in the woods and they go to the lake and it's like that other common phrase. It's not about fishing's not about catching fish. It's about fishing. So it's just like getting out there, finding something to do that gets your mind off of what's going on and allows you kind of time to process what is. Because the thing about it, all the stuff that you see in all those different bad events, they're always going to be there. They're always going to be with you.
Yeah.
Time does heal all wounds, but at the same time, you got to acknowledge, and part of it is acceptance that, okay, that's just part of me now. And now I have to figure out a way to keep going and to move forward and to not let it affect my loved ones, my family, my friends, my life. I can't let it affect my life that I am not going to be the person I want to be.
One of the things that I remember early on when I first got into the fire service that the fire chief made very clear was that you did not cause this incident. You didn't cause the trauma. It's not your fault that this happened. And your job is to do what you can to make it less worse. And so when we leave that fire scene, we leave that at the fire scene, and that isn't always easy. But I think part of some of the things that I've kind of helped with newer guys, especially we have some very young high school students that are doing Explorer, and some of the younger people that come in are 18, 19 years old, and they're all gung ho. Is to explain before you throw them into working with the coroner what that means, and just being very frank with them. You're going to see someone dead, and this could be hard for you. If it is hard for you, don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, I got to step back. This is too much for me.
It's not normal, and
it's not normal.
Don't think that it has to be normal, because it doesn't.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's really good. So being really upfront with people, and then after the fact, being willing to listen. And I don't have a title necessarily. I'm not, although I do have a history with being a chaplain in the past. I'm not the chaplain on my department, but I think that the guys on the department know that I am there to ask questions or just debrief, and I'll text them after, because it's a volunteer thing. I mean, I'm coming from my office where I'm sitting at a desk and running into a fire or running into an accident where I'm pulling someone out of a car who's maybe passed away or is in very, very rough shape, and then I go back to my office, and what am I going to do? Like go back to work? I got to process that. Or if it's 3 a.m., I'm not going to fall back asleep. I sit down and just try and not bother my family. So I think some of the coping strategies that are really good are the talking it out, being willing to listen, and then having a plan. And so every department should probably have some kind of a emergency debrief plan, where immediately the chief or the captain or someone reaches out to that person and just says, hey, I know you had a tough call today. Is there anything going on? Can I be a listening ear? No, confidential. No, this isn't going to go in your permanent record. You're not going to lose for a lot of law enforcement. I think if they were to say, man, this is really, really hard, and I'm really struggling with this, I think there's a fear that they might lose their job. Like, you're mentally, you have mental illness.
No, we can't.
We're going to take your guns away. And so there's a process that is normal and healthy for us to go through, and we need to go through that. Well, we've kind of come up against the clock here, and and I appreciate your time. Tell us a little bit about your book and where people can get it. It's not just for firefighters, although
it's not. No.
Yeah, so it's a leadership book on on teaching, and it would be great for anybody who is in a leadership position. So it's called Too Dark 30.
Yep, Too Dark 30. You can get it on my website, which is toodark30.com. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, all the any way, shape, or form. I did the audio book. I narrated it. As much as I'd love to have some cool, narration, I did it myself. That was one thing people were like, when you do your audio book, I'm like, yeah, I'll do the audio book. You got to do it yourself. You got to tell the stories in your voice. You can't have someone else tell your stories. And I'm like, okay, yes. So yeah, the audiobook is available it's on Amazon, it's on Apple, on iTunes, it's everywhere, Google, all that different stuff. But the book itself, the book itself is really written for people that are trying to train new people how to understand that when you're a leader, whatever you're doing, whether it's a business, whether you're in law enforcement, being a firefighter, paramedic, if you're the director of public works, whatever your position is, whatever you do, if you're the leader, if you're given that title, part of your job is to be a teacher.
Yeah.
You have to bring the new person up to speed. You have to teach them the way you guys do things. You have to get them on board and understand that this is the process. You have to teach. So if you don't know how to teach, because we all don't go to school to become teachers, I tried to take my years of experience in teaching, having taught every grade from 6 through 12 in college, and then all the experience in the leadership roles that I've had in the service. And I tried to boil it all down to these are the key things that I've found success in bringing people into, the whatever service it is, and tried to bring them to the point where they were knowledgeable, acceptable, and had enough wherewithal and enthusiasm to do a good job. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was my main basis of why I wrote that book. So yeah, you're right. It could be for anyone. It doesn't have to be just someone in fire or EMS, law enforcement kind of things. It's general enough where everyone can take something out of it,
That's
and
awesome.
it's full of stories, because I love telling stories. I think stories give context, and I think they set things up to, how to understand different things and different, ideas. So the book is filled with stories that I've had, and over the course of the years. The names were changed to protect the innocent, as they say, but the essence of what's going on is there. So the book itself is great. You can get it everywhere. I've got a workbook that goes with the book. I've got some departments that use it as a training resource, for people that are looking to become officers and things like that. So the other thing is, I know we're up against the wall here, but my biggest thing is, if anyone has any problems, questions, anything, I am 100% available to be contacted. Reach out to me. I will try to answer any question I can, and if I can't answer it, maybe I know someone who can, or I'll find out and try to get back to you with whatever I can. But I want to make sure people understand that they're not in this, whatever they're doing, they're never alone. And they need, if they have problems, if they need help, if they, are looking for guidance, if they're looking for all those different things, there's people out there to help you. You just got to ask, and don't be scared to ask.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I appreciate, first I'll say thank you as a fellow firefighter, medical provider. Thank you for your service. 21 years is longer than I think I'll be in. I started at 40. I'm 48 now, and I'm still chugging along. But 21 years is a great number to reach, a milestone, and so congratulations on that. Thank you for your service, and thank you for writing a book on leadership, and specifically gearing it towards first responders and paramedics, and then allowing other leaders to learn from your experience in a very tough field. And this was a heavy show, and I hope that it helps some people. I have reached out to departments in the past that have had tough calls, and they're visibly available through press releases, where they've had to pull people out of burning buildings. And I know they're volunteers, and I've just reached out to them with some encouraging words through Facebook or email, just to say, hey, you know, I'm in this too, and I want to, you know, encourage you that you did everything you could, or whatever it is. So I'll write them to that in hopes that that gets to their members that experience it. And so we all have the opportunity to be positive, to give encouragement to other people, and to reach out. It just takes the time to do it. And I would encourage people to do that as well. I want to thank my sponsor, and it's always nice to have a sponsor on a show like this. Rhett Boson is a great resource for your phone and internet needs, and so be sure to check out the show specials that he has, and the links will be in the comments below. Have a great day. Thank you for being here, Mark, and we will talk to you.
Thank you a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll talk to everybody soon.